A warm welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to SLENDO 2020. Please remain standing for the national anthem. Thank you. To commence the proceedings of the inauguration ceremony of SLENDO 2020, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to light the traditional oil lamp. For this, may I cordially invite President of Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists, Dr. Charles Anthony Pillay, Patron and most senior past President, Dr. Henry N. Rajaratnam, Dr. Henry Rajaratnam, Orator for 2020, Professor Pujita Vikramasinghe, President-elect of Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists, Dr. Chaminda Garusinghe, Immediate past President and Chairperson, SLDF, Dr. Manilka Sumanatilaka, Project Lead, SLDCI, Dr. Noel Somasundaram, Treasurer of Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists, Dr. Samanthi Kure, Chairperson, Scientific Committee, Dr. Dimithu Mutukuda, and Secretary, Dr. Kamani Lianarachi. Thank you. Let me invite the following dignitaries to take their respective seats at the head table. Dr. Charles Anthony Pillay, Professor Pujita Vikramasinghe, Dr. Chaminda Garusinghe, Dr. Manilka Sumanatilaka, and Dr. Kamini Lianarachi. To deliver the welcome address of the inauguration ceremony of SLENDO 2020, may I cordially invite President of Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists, Dr. Charles Anthony Pillay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists, it's my pleasure to warmly welcome all of you to the Endocrine Congress, SLENDO 2020. This year's SLENDO 2020 conference is unique and special for multiple reasons. 10 years down the line, this Endocrine Congress was held in Kandy under the leadership of Professor Upali Langasekara, and in 2020, the conference is back in the Hill Country. The world faces a challenge of a lifetime with the COVID-19 pandemic sweeping across, disrupting human lives and all components intertwined with it. The world has witnessed the cancellation of some of the major events and conferences. SLENDO 2020 had its fair share of uncertainties and challenges directed at us. When I look back at the 2-year stint as president of SLCE, the only consistency seems to be the challenges directed towards SLENDO. In 2019, we faced the Easter bombings, and now in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic. We started off planning SLENDO 2020 almost immediately after the conclusion of SLENDO 2019. One of my aims in 2020 was to be on top of the game and to be prepared for all uncertainties. The anticipation and interest for SLENDO 2020 was palpable with the success of SLENDO 2019. However, with COVID-19, we were in crossroads to decide whether to cancel the conference or to continue. We, the council, believed that in challenging times such as these, it was important to stay true to the founding principles of SLENDO, which is to disseminate knowledge and educate our medical fraternity. Taking up the challenge required a novel initiative, and this was to conduct the conference virtually. The concept of a completely virtual conference was novel and daunting. However, plans were drawn to go on with the virtual conference. As the prevailing situation turned favorable, the concept to incorporate a live event was introduced, giving birth to the hybrid conference. Merging the two formats was an even more daunting task. Still, we did not give up, and you could see for yourselves our untiring efforts bearing fruit. The virtual component of SLENDO 2020 conference has truly expanded our reach. I'm glad to say that 4 parallel gatherings are ongoing in 4 venues in the island where the conference is live streamed. In addition, 1,000 participants are joining us live as virtual registrants from all across the globe today. We are also hoping that a large number of medical professionals and science enthusiasts are joining our live event through our live stream. SLENDO 2020 sessions will be running over 3 days. The faculty comprises of 50 local and international resource persons who are experts in the field of endocrinology and the allied specialties. We are privileged to be able to assemble this elite panel of experts onto our SLENDO platform. The scientific committee led by Dr. Dimuthu Muthukuda has lined up an interesting agenda for the conference. The committee has taken into account the virtual component and introduced new forums such as panel discussions, panel of experts, perspective, and case-based discussions in addition to the conventional lectures. Research and studies are the true components of growth and development in the field of medicine. Despite the challenges, the SLENDO Abstract Committee, under the guidance of Drs. Navoda Athapattu and Sonali Gunathilaka, has gone to great lengths to incorporate valuable free paper component to the repertoire of this academic program. It's with great pleasure and privilege that I warmly welcome all of you to SLENDO 2020 Hybrid Conference and be part of one of the first and finest conferences in the world plagued with COVID. As our slogan reads, this is where the world meets for endocrinology. I wish each and every one of you a fruitful 3 days and an enjoyable stay in Kandy. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our Secretary, Dr. Kamani Leonaracci, and the Council, all the endocrinologists, our sponsors, and all the support staff for all the support given to make SLENDO 20 Hybrid Conference a reality. SLENDO 2020 is the conference to get back to its feet in a fallen world, hoping to be an example and lead as a beacon of hope in a new era and new world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me cordially invite consultant endocrinologist Dr. Kavinga Gunawardana to read citations for fellowships of SLENDO 2020.
Good morning. Mr. President, members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and honor to present the members of the College who will confer the Honorary Fellowship of the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists this morning. Manilka Roshan Sumanathilaka, MBBS, MD, MRCP London, MRCP Diabetes and Endocrinology UK, FRCP Edinburgh, FACE USA. Dr. Sunman Tilaka obtained his primary medical education from Kasturba Medical College, Manipal in 1994 with first-class honors. He had a brilliant undergraduate career with distinctions in community medicine, ENT, and ophthalmology. In 2007, he obtained his MD in medicine from the Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, University of Colombo. Subsequently, he received his specialist MD training at St. Bartholomew Hospital, London, UK, one of the leading tertiary referral centers for endocrinology. He worked as the consultant endocrinologist at the Teaching Hospital Karapitiya from 2011 to 2016. He was instrumental in developing this unit as a reference center for diabetes and endocrinology in the Southern Province. He is the immediate past president of the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists and has made immense contributions for the development of the specialty in the country during his tenure. He is currently the chairperson of the Sri Lanka Diabetes Federation, the secretary of the South Asian Federation of Endocrine Societies, SAFIS, and the vice president of the National Diabetes Association. He has numerous publications in peer-reviewed journals and is a member of the specialty board in endocrinology for the Postgraduate Institute of Medicine. Moreover, he serves as a trainer and an examiner for various undergraduate and postgraduate programs. He is currently the consultant endocrinologist at the National Hospital of Sri Lanka. Mr. President, members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, may I now present Dr. Manilka Roshan Sumanathilaka for the Honorary Fellowship of Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to introduce the Dr. Henry Rajaratnam Orator for 2020, Professor Pujitha Wickramasinghe, MBBS, MD, DCH, PhD. Professor Wickramasinghe qualified in medicine from the University of Colombo in 1996 and completed his MD Pediatrics in 2002. He had his pre-board certification overseas training in pediatric clinical nutrition and gastroenterology from the prestigious University of Queensland. He obtained his PhD from the University of Colombo in 2010. He is currently the Senior Professor in Pediatrics, Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, and Honorary Consultant Pediatrician at Lady Ridgeway Hospital. He has received 23 awards for his excellence in the field of research and is the recipient of multiple research and travel grants. He has delivered 7 national orations and more than 85 national and international invited lectures. He has co-authored 6 books and has contributed to 20 national and international books with main focus on childhood nutrition. He currently serves in many national committees on food, maternal and child nutrition attached to the Ministry of Health and Nutrition, Ministry of Education, and National Medicine Regulatory Authority. He is the chairperson of the editorial panel publishing health and physical education textbook for school children. His research interests are childhood body composition, obesity and metabolic syndrome, maternal and child nutrition, effects of early nutrition on diseases in later life, and micronutrients in infancy. He has 80 journal articles in peer-reviewed journals to his credit. My encounter with Professor Wickramasinghe was when I was a medical student. He was a registrar, marking the register of students at the pediatric professorial unit in Colombo. He was very strict about punctuality. As days went by, I realized that he was a good teacher and an astute clinician who earned the respect of many students, including me. Thus, I feel privileged to have this esteemed academic as the orator of our annual academic sessions. I will now invite Professor Wickramasinghe to accept the orator medal and deliver his oration.
Good morning, everybody. Can I have the slides? I thank the President and the Council of the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists for giving me this opportunity to deliver this prestigious oration, Dr. Henry Rajaratnam Oration 2020, on a matter close to my heart and also needed urgent attention, not only as a nation, but as the human kind as a whole. Dr. Henry Navaratnaraja Rajaratnam, educated at Royal College, Colombo, and entered medical college, securing F.V. Veerasurya Memorial Prize for the best performance in medical entrance. He obtained his MBBS in 1962, MD Ceylon 7 years later, and MRCP UK in 1973. He received his endocrinology training at North Middlesex Hospital in London, UK. He is well known for his contribution to the development of endocrinology in Sri Lanka, for making deliberations to the Ministry of Health to recognize this as a specialty, then making the curricula required to the Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, University of Colombo, and thereafter being a trainer and a mentor. He has initiated development of the profession in this country with related professional bodies from the Endocrine Society of Sri Lanka to the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists. His contribution was not merely limited to this country, but to the region and world as a whole. So undoubtedly, this is an honor and a privilege that has been vested on me to deliver this year's oration in this magnificent heritage city. Two decades ago, when I began my career as an undergraduate and then a trainee under the guidance of Professor Lama Surya, I took up special interest in pediatric nutrition. Although undernutrition was the main problem seen in this country, I began to notice that childhood obesity is an emerging issue. Since then, I have been able to highlight the magnitude of the metabolic problem associated with childhood obesity in Sri Lanka. Since then, over a period of little under a quarter of a century, I have seen that the epidemic of childhood obesity is increasing day by day, locally as well as globally. Although the national figures for obesity lies little less under 2%, both for overweight and obesity, the prevalence in different metropolitan areas range from 10 to 20%. From 2004, when I began to do field surveys, you could see that it had been fairly high and gradually it had been increasing. And in 2019, it has increased by about 25 to 30%. Obesity is defined as the presence of excess body fat associated with metabolic derangements. For Sri Lankan children to develop metabolic syndrome, we have identified the percentage of body fat needed to be more than 28.6% for boys and 38.7% for girls. The current international obesity cutoff values underestimate obesity in the South Asian region, as we have shown that overweight cutoffs match the above mentioned fat mass cutoff levels. Therefore, a more prudent cutoff for Sri Lankan children would be internationally determined overweight cutoff values in the absence of a locally or regionally available cutoff values. This fact is even true for adults and for which many of us in the audience would also agree with me. Obesity is the immediate risk factor for the development of many non-communicable diseases. The NCD burden in Sri Lanka is very high, and especially with the high morbidity at younger age. Almost 83% of all deaths are directly or indirectly attributed to NCD related, but more than that, during the productive life of an individual, there are a lot of causing morbidity. Although conventionally we believe that non-communicable diseases are adult diseases, we could see many of these metabolic derangements begin from a very young age in these obese individuals. It could almost affect any organ from head to toe. Metabolic syndrome and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease are two conditions that could affect from a very young age. The relationship between adverse body composition and different metabolic abnormalities were observed from the 18th century onwards, and early part of the 19th century and 20th century also, these were more elaborated. However, the metabolic syndrome, what we connoted today, was described for the first time by Gerald Reaven in this 1988 Banting lecture as an insulin-mediated increased cardiovascular risk, and he described four main components. And in 2004, Grundy and co-workers described 6 measurable components in metabolic syndrome, namely abdominal obesity, atherogenic dyslipidemia, raised blood pressure, insulin resistance with or without glucose intolerance, the pro-inflammatory state, and the pro-coagulable state. Different diagnostic criteria were developed for adults over a period of time And in 2006, the International Diabetic Federation described the consensus definition for adults. And in 2007, the IDF developed criteria for 10 to 15-year-old children, but discouraged making a diagnosis below 10 years of age due to lack of evidence that was existing at that time. Similar to adult, it was diagnosed in the presence of elevated waist circumference with 2 or more features out of the 4 main evidence. That is dysglycemia, hypertension, elevated triglyceride, and reduced HDL levels. Although I personally do not agree with this cutoff value described, as more of them were adult cutoff levels, as well as it was a one static level. But we know the pediatric population is a growing population, and most of these cutoff values do change with age. And in my research, I have used a modified version of the IDF criteria and to suit the pediatric population, and most of my publications in international journals have accepted that without any questioning of that. Presence of metabolic syndrome in children in different parts of the world are described, and the prevalence ever increasing with worsening state of obesity. In the general population, it hovers around 2 to 3%, and among obese, it varies between a fifth to a third of the population. Obesity-related metabolic derangements in Sri Lanka. For the first time in 2006, in a clinic-based study, we describe obesity-related metabolic derangements among Sri Lankan children, and metabolic syndrome was found to be about 20% in this obese population. Although NASH cannot be diagnosed without a liver biopsy, based on ultrasonography as well as elevated liver enzymes, a presumed diagnosis of NASH was made, and then it also showed about 20% in this obese population. And these data were published in the Ceylon Medical Journal in 2006. Then I moved into a community-based study in 2010, where a cohort of 900 school children, 5 to 15 years from the Colombo district were studied, and overweight and obesity were little over 13%. And I have lumped these two together rather than taking only overweight, only obesity, because these two actually in the local context matters as clinical obesity. This study revealed that many children had abnormal metabolic profiles and metabolic syndrome prevalence among obese children to be more than 20%. And in older age groups, this is slightly higher. So the metabolic syndrome prevalence, although IDF did not want to entertain below 10 years of age, we could see even in our population between 5 to 10 years, the problem do exist. When considering the individual metabolic components, more than 40% of this childhood population had at least one adverse metabolic component, and they were necessarily not overweight children. Acanthosis, which is an early sign of insulin resistance, was seen in a sizable portion of children who were obese as well. And interestingly, all of them had at least one abnormal metabolic parameter, denoting that acanthosis is not a sign to be ignored at all. The effect of overweight and obesity on insulin secretion and insulin resistance clearly show that with worsening level of overweight, insulin markers increase. And among obese, it is statistically higher than the other two groups. The cohort did not have a single case of diabetes mellitus, but you could see that although blood sugar maintained within the acceptable limits, denoted by the red lines, the distribution of insulin is stretched over a wide range. This shows that the strain on the pancreas and its insulin secretion to maintain an euglycemic state. This cartoon shows how the insulin secretion varies according to the unit increase in the waist circumference and BMI. And blue line shows the fasting and the red line shows the fed state, that is 2 hours after OGTT or glucose load, where both are quite steep in this population. Wincup and co-workers studied the British white Caucasians, denoted by the blue lines, and South Asian migrants, denoted by the red lines in the UK. They showed that South Asian children have a higher level of insulin secretion per given BMI or waist circumference unit compared to the white Caucasians. And our data was published in the BMC research note. Then I had the privilege of studying again with a collaboration with a group of doctors in Negombo area, where we screened more than 15,000 school children, 5 to 17 years of age, from 5 educational zones in the Negombo district, Negombo area, and showed that overweight and obesity to be about 12% in this population, and the data was published in the Asia Pacific Journal of Public Health. When we looked at this population, a cohort of 404 obese children were studied, and they are metabolically assessed. And the distribution of the abnormal cardiometabolic parameters are shown, where dyslipidemia was the commonest metabolic derangement, with about 76% of them having affected levels. And dysglycemia was seen in just little over 20%, while 16% had hypertension. Metabolic syndrome was seen in about 20% of this study population. Although metabolic syndrome was seen only in a fifth of this overweight and obese population, at least one abnormal metabolic problem was seen in about 84% of this population, and 66.5% had at least 2 or more abnormal metabolic parameters. Therefore, only 33.5% could be considered metabolically normal obese if presence of 2 or more abnormal metabolic parameters were considered as unhealthy. This showed that obesity is invariably associated with metabolic derangements. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is a major health problem, and it is tipped to be the commonest liver disease now in children. The association between metabolic syndrome and the markers of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is shown here. Highlighted are the significant values, although liver transaminases in isolation did not show any association in metabolic syndrome. The elevated ALT to AST ratio and hepatic steatosis were clearly associated with metabolic syndrome, where NAFLD is considered to be the hepatic component of metabolic syndrome. In this population, again, the obese children, the insulin levels were studied, where impaired glucose tolerance at both fasting and post-glucose level was seen to be about 20%. Diabetes mellitus was seen in this young population, where 7 participants were diabetic, and they were having type 2 diabetes mellitus, and all except one, all were about 10 years of age. Although the impaired glucose homeostasis was seen in a fifth of the population, almost half showed insulin-resistant state, highlighting the magnitude of the problem of obesity, which increased with the progression of age. This slide shows how the mean age of different states of impairment in the glycemic control range from normal glucose tolerance in the extreme left to type 2 diabetes mellitus in the extreme right. The mean age of more severe forms of dysglycemia increased with age. It clearly shows the early onset of the disease and progression with age. Therefore, it all a matter of time from developing obesity in early childhood and progressing to early onset of NCD by adolescent and not even as a young adult. Then I had a collaboration with my colleagues in Jaffna University, where we studied a cohort of 1,200 almost children from 6 to 16 years of age in the Jaffna district in 5 educational zones. Overweight and obesity prevalence again was 17% in this community. This slide shows the distribution of abnormal metabolic components and metabolic syndrome among obese children, which was seen almost about 50%, which was very, very high compared to other parts what I have studied so far. This slide shows the distribution of abnormal metabolic components and metabolic syndrome among, this slide shows the distribution of individual metabolic abnormalities, with more than 50% having at least one abnormal metabolic parameter, showing metabolic derangements begin from a very young age, and which is not a healthy state. The mean distribution of fasting blood sugar, insulin, and home IR are shown according to obese and non-obese individuals. There is a clear increase in all three parameters in obese compared to non-obese children. And of the data from my study, this is the only one which showed that there was a significantly higher level of blood sugar in obese in this age group, although still majority of them were able to manage a euglycemic state. Then we did another small study in Colombo municipal area, part of a PhD study of a student of mine in 2017, where 366 children were studied, with more than a quarter of them being overweight and obese, compared to the prevalence, which was studied in 2002 and 2003 in my first field study in the same area, involving 8 to 12 years old at that time. It has almost doubled in a span of 15 years time span. In this group of children, the lipid abnormalities were the highest metabolic derangement as compared to the 2010 data from the same area. The dyslipidemia has risen to almost 14% in the general population, from less than 2% in the 2007 era. Although numbers are small, almost half of the obese children had metabolic syndrome. So this is comparing again with the data which we received from Jaffna Peninsula. So this all shows that there is a clear rise in overweight and obesity among children, as well as the metabolic derangements are ever increasing in this childhood population. When we look at the distribution of metabolic abnormalities, almost 2/3 of the population have at least one metabolic parameter in an abnormal state. The home IRR in the obese, which denotes the insulin resistance, has almost doubled in the younger age group and almost tripled in the older age group compared to their non-obese counterparts. The leptin level has fourfold increase compared to their obese counterparts. However, one can notice that the fasting blood sugar remains same more or less across the normal and overweight children, which means that again the insulin secretion is at a higher level to maintain euglycemic state, and it's only a matter of time that they would progress into impaired glucose tolerance and diabetes mellitus. Ladies and gentlemen, behavior changes, bringing changes in dietary habits and physical activity is the hallmark of management of childhood obesity. However, with the increase in obesity-related morbidity and the resistance to conventional treatment, new recommendations have emerged on the use of medication apart from surgical treatment. Especially with the increase in the level of insulin resistance, metformin has shown promise and acceptance by the users due to low side effect profile and to bring an initial control and then to go on for the normal conventional treatment. I had the privilege of designing and leading a clinical trial, the use of metformin in children, which is the largest and the longest to date among children, where we followed up 150 children over 1 year period in the Negombo area. The primary outcome measures of percentage fat mass and the BMI C scores showed a statistically significant reduction. The systolic blood pressure showed a significant reduction at both 6 and 12 month interval periods. Both fasting insulin, 2-hour insulin, and home IR showed a higher reduction in the treatment group compared to the control group, although it was not statistically significant difference. The total cholesterol, LDL, triglyceride, and high sensitive CRP showed a statistically significant reduction at different timelines of the study in favor of the treatment group with metformin. A statistically significant reduction in the metabolic syndrome was observed in metformin group, but an increase in the placebo group, denoting that metformin can exert a significant impact on the morbidity and reversal of some of the metabolic derangements. Vitamin D deficiency shows higher prevalence among obese children. Furthermore, it is also attributed that vitamin D deficiency is associated with insulin resistance. We studied the prevalence of vitamin D deficiency among obese children and effect of supplementation on metabolic profile. We have described vitamin D deficiency among obese children in Sri Lanka. 75% of obese children were deficient, and only less than 5% were having normal levels, denoting more than 95% were either deficient or insufficient. And these data were published in the BMC Pediatrics. The insulin level and insulin resistance showed statistically significant association with vitamin D. Vitamin D supplementation showed that improvement of the HDL and alkaline phosphate levels, especially when they were given in high therapeutic doses. Serum vitamin D levels were also increased, but the significant rise had been seen in those with high dose of administration. So, ladies and gentlemen, metabolic syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and hypocalcemia are common among obese Sri Lankan children, and it has clearly shown that over a span of less than 10 years, it has risen and not confined to the Colombo area alone. Although children remain normoglycemic, insulin secretion increases and insulin resistance begin to develop from a very young age. Development of insulin resistance is directly related to obesity. Metformin and calcium supplementation seems to improve the metabolic profile. Knowing the magnitude of the problem and identifying the problem modes of treatment are important. However, if such could be prevented, it would be a higher value in reducing the burden of childhood obesity and related NCD morbidity later in life. Therefore, the impact of early nutrition on development of obesity and related metabolic morbidity is being looked into. David Barker in the 1980s epidemiologically described that perinatal undernutrition has many adverse outcomes later in life and identify low birth weight as the key risk factor to develop NCD related morbidity later in life. However, many research showed that it is not the birth weight alone the reason to develop NCD in later in life, but how weight changes later in life was the main factor. Many in the Indian subcontinent, Sri Lanka and South Asia region, about 6-7 decades ago, were born low birth weight, but the prevalence of NCDs were not that high until the last 3 to 4 decades. So some studies have shown that if they remain in a poor nutritional status, they would be metabolically protected. In other words, if someone born with a low birth weight and grow with a slow velocity, they would be metabolically better protected. This led Atul Siegel and Alan Lucas from the University College of London to propose the postnatal growth acceleration hypothesis, which states that accelerated growth during the critical time period of life would lead to the development of non-communicable diseases later in life. In other words, if a child is born small and remains small, would be metabolically more healthier than a child who, with a low birth weight and had rapid growth, or what we used to call a catch-up growth, later in life, they would be having a lot of metabolic adverse consequences. This led to the development of the concept of first 1,000 days of life, where a healthy birth weight and a healthy postnatal growth during the first 2 years of life is important for later health. We have been able to produce similar data for Sri Lanka children as well to support the growth acceleration hypothesis. The Colombo district cohort that the 2010, which I studied, showed that those who were in a lowest birth tertile and if remained in the lowest BMI tertile at 5 to 15 years of life, denoted by the blue arrow, has a safer metabolic profile than those who were born with a small birth weight but is in the highest current BMI tertile, denoted by the red arrow. So the same data for the lipid parameters were also seen, where if somebody did not have a accelerated growth during the early life and remains in a smaller BMI, that they would be much more protected than somebody who is having a lower birth weight but later on have a rapid accelerated growth. So birth weight per se is not the sole cause to develop adverse metabolic profiles later in life. The same when we looked at the fasting insulin, post-glucose load insulin, as well as insulin resistant, show the same pattern. We were able to reproduce this in the Colombo municipal cohort in 2017, where accelerated weight gain during 6 to 18 months was also associated with a higher fat mass rather than linear growth in the 11 to 13 years age group of children. So that means that when they grow, they put on a lot of fat rather than they are growing in their length or bone growth. Therefore, risk factors of NCD are seen among Sri Lankan children. Rapid postnatal growth is the main environmental risk factor for the development of metabolic derangements. Populations, that is parents and children, should be aware of these conditions and to detect them early in life. NCD prevention has to start from a very young age. Time has come for all of us to think seriously about the future health of our nation. It is quite evident that obesity has the potential to negate many of the achievements that we have achieved health-wise in this country, especially life expectancy at birth that we have been cherishing for the last few years of more than 75 years could be negated, leading children to die even before their parents, as this was quoted some time ago by Paul Simmet, one of the former IDF presidents. And that's where early detection is the key, where endocrinologists could play a key role. And once again, Sir George Alberti, one of the former IDF presidents, went on to say that early detection followed by treatment is vital to halt the progression of metabolic syndrome and safeguard the future health of children and adolescents. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to pay tribute to the people who contributed for this research. And one of the main things is, without funding agencies, you would not be able to do research of this magnitude. And I would be grateful to this and I'd like to salute all these national as well as international funding organizations. How much of money or funding you have will not be able to continue on a research project unless you have an able team to work with you. And that is where I'm privileged to work with my colleagues who have been helping me in making this research a reality. I thank all my colleagues at academic and non-academic in the Department of Pediatrics at the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo, Vice Chancellors of University of Colombo, former and current, my family, my friends and colleagues from other universities, and all of you who have come here on our invitation. I like to end my oration with a quote made by Professor David Parker, and then where growth paths, good paths of growth and development and the greatest gift society can give to the next generation. And I would like to also make a small appeal to this audience, where even the IDF lacks a lot of data, and we can show that the children of this region, how they are suffering, and if we don't do anything. So I would appeal for people to engage in more relevant research as well as to identify the disease at an early stage to prevent this epidemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, to deliver the vote of thanks of the inauguration ceremony of SLENDO 2020, may I cordially invite Secretary of Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists, Dr. Kamani Lianarachi.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks at SLENDO 2020, the annual academic sessions of the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists. Despite challenges by global health issues, I'm happy to say that we have succeeded in maintaining a high standard in the academic program. The pillar behind this is Dr. Dimuthu Muthukuda, the chair of the scientific committee. I would like to congratulate her and thank her for all the endeavors. I also thank all speakers joining us both physically and virtually. The faculty of SLENDO 2020 holds world authorities in the fields of endocrinology and diabetes. My heartfelt gratitude goes to Professor William Young, Professor Ashley Grossman, Professor Susan Mandel, Professor John Neville Price, Professor David Matthews, Professor Serge Jabu, Professor Mark Gernald, Professor Frederick Karp, Professor Karim Miran, Professor Krishna Chatterjee, Dr. Nikki Karavitaki, Dr. Lalanta Leela Ratna, and Dr. Janna Jayasena, who are joining with us virtually. A special note of thanks also goes to our regional speakers, Dr. Manju Chandran, Dr. Sanjay Kalra, Dr. Ali Java, Dr. Abbas Rasa, Dr. Gagan Priya, and Dr. Tint Lat. I'm also thankful to our local speakers, chairpersons, and judges who, despite their busy schedules, had no hesitation to support the college. On behalf of the SLCE, I would like to thank Professor Pujitha Vikramasinghe, the orator of Dr. Henry Rajaratnam oration. A special note of thanks goes to Dr. Navoda Atapattu and Dr. Sonali Gunatilaka for handling abstracts and all related work. A personal note of thanks goes to Dr. Noel Somasundaram for guiding us, Dr. Kavinga Gunawardana, Dr. Chandrika Subasinghe, Dr. Bati Alagoda, Dr. Sunishka Ponna Peruma for supporting in many ways. The trainees in endocrinology need special mention as they did an amazing job to relieve the workload from our shoulders. Thank you, Gayana, Harsha, and Nipuna for taking the leading roles and supporting in many ways. I also want to thank the management at Grand Canyon for the assistance given to host the event. I also thank hospital directors and the relevant endocrinologists at the National Hospital Colombo, Colombo South Teaching Hospital Jaffna, and District General Hospital Mathura for arranging local auditoriums to showcase live SLENDO 2020 sessions. Heartfelt gratitude goes to Dilisha and all at Asia Tours, our event planner, Marlon and his team at Bling Productions, and Dream Squad for IT assistance, Asanka for AV, audio visuals. A big thank you goes to our pharma sponsors of the year. We greatly appreciate your continuous support in college activities. Behind the scene, Dr. Arshad Sami, Dr. Arshad Sami, Tivera, Sachi, Vidyani, Shamika, Hishalini, Sanatani, and Roy played an excellent job to run the show. Thank you so much for all the hard work. I also wish to remember with gratitude all invited guests from all academic colleges, associations, and societies, and all the other distinguished guests who have accepted our invitation to join, to be present today. Finally, I will thank the person who deserves it the most. That's Dr. Charles Anthony Pille, our president. He was the master planner of the whole Congress. Thank you for your limitless energy, perseverance, and compassion. So to end, I hope you I hope you have a very productive and pleasurable session ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude the proceedings of the inauguration ceremony of SLENDO 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise as the ceremonial procession leaves the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, refreshments are available outside the hall at the lobby. Enjoy and thank you.
Forxiga is indicated in adults aged 18 years and older with type 2 diabetes mellitus to improve glycemic control as monotherapy. When diet and exercise alone do not provide adequate glycemic control in patients for whom use of metformin is considered inappropriate due to intolerance. Add-on combination therapy in combination with other glucose-lowering medicinal products, including insulin, when these, together with diet and exercise, do not provide adequate glycemic control. Common drug therapies for type 2 diabetes target the key defects of impaired insulin secretion and increased insulin resistance. Forxiga acts through an insulin-independent mechanism by targeting the kidney. The kidney plays an important role in the handling of blood glucose. In healthy individuals, the kidney filters roughly 180 grams of glucose per day. In the glomerulus, glucose is filtered out of the blood and travels into the proximal tubule. Here, sodium glucose co-transporters, mainly SGLT2, transport glucose into the cells of the proximal tubule, followed by transport back into the blood via facilitative glucose transporters. SGLT2, the target of Forxiga, is selectively expressed in the kidney. As a selective inhibitor of SGLT2, Forxiga causes less glucose to be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, and instead redirects roughly 70 grams of excess glucose, or about 280 associated calories, per day into the urine. The amount of glucose removed depends on blood glucose concentration and glomerular filtration rate. Because the mechanism of action is independent of insulin secretion or action, Forxiga complements a wide range of anti-diabetic agents whose mechanisms rely on insulin-dependent pathways. Forxiga, an approach of removing excess glucose and its associated calories via the kidney, thereby lowering hemoglobin A1C and providing the additional benefit of weight loss and blood pressure reduction, all in a once-daily oral tablet.
Gliclazide selectively blocks ATP-sensitive potassium channels in the pancreas. ATP-sensitive potassium channels are also found in the heart. Potassium channels in the heart
begins with a promise to make life better. To find a way to come through no matter what the odds. To be stronger than we thought we could be. And to share our strength with the world around us. Our promises make us who we are. And every day, we work to keep our promises to those we touch. And to help them keep theirs.
Gliclazide is a second-generation oral sulfonylurea used to control blood glucose levels in type 2 diabetes. It inhibits the ATP-sensitive potassium channels on the membrane of pancreatic beta cells, which stimulates insulin release. Gliclazide reversibly binds to ATP-sensitive potassium channels thanks to its inhibition of cloned beta cell KATP channels, unlike other sulfonylureas such as glimepiride and glibenclamide. This regulates insulin release, reducing hyperglycemia risk. Gliclazide selectively blocks ATP-sensitive potassium channels in the pancreas. ATP-sensitive potassium channels are also found in the heart. Potassium channels in the heart are thought to be protective during ischemia. Inhibiting them may eliminate this effect. The selective inhibition of potassium channels in the pancreas means that gliclazide preserves the protective effects of potassium channels in the heart, known as ischemic preconditioning. Some patients may take sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitors, SGLT2s, with gliclazide. Sulfonylureas and SGLT2s have complementary mechanisms of action. Sulfonylureas reduce glucose levels by stimulating insulin release, whereas SGLT2s inhibit glucose reuptake to stimulate glucose elimination. Together, they effectively regulate blood glucose levels. This combination may provide further benefits. When added to SUs, SGLT2s induce greater weight loss compared with other treatments, and unlike other treatments, do not increase the risk of hypoglycemia. A common and serious complication of diabetes is diabetic kidney disease. The risk of diabetic kidney disease is higher in patients without glycemic control. Gliclazide demonstrated, in an intensive strategy, a complete nephroprotection. Gliclazide also has antioxidant effects that can reduce oxidative stress and protect against diabetic kidney disease.
We at Signutra, global experts in medical nutrition, understand that nutrition science is common across the world, but nutrition needs and demands are unique in each country. Signutra Incorporation is registered in Delaware, USA. The formulations are developed by international nutritional experts in collaboration with Fortune 500 companies. At Signutra, our vision is to become a trusted and leading global player in the field of medical nutrition. Our mission is to offer evidence-based medical nutrition required by consumers, which supports their recovery and well-being. and is easy to endorse by the healthcare professional. With this, we launched our first evidence-based signature nutrition products in India in the year 2017. Our journey of success that started in India continued in SAARC and ASEAN countries. We are committed to extend it in other parts of the world. We reached more than 35,000 pharmacies, more than 42,000 HCPs, and Signutra's signature nutrition range is being used by more than 500,000 consumers in India. We have numerous publications on nutrition in various international journals. All these efforts have been recognized in the industry that has enabled us to receive lot of accolades. Here is a glimpse of this recognition. In fact, we are pleased to share that in such a short span, GrowViva has become #1 prescribed brand in the child category. We are committed to further strengthen our product portfolio, which will be customized to Indian habits and needs. We are working closely with our reputed research and development team to launch advanced nutritional supplement for special needs like MaxVida HPHF, high protein, high fiber for faster recovery. So, in the quest of creating evidence-based medical nutrition, we seek everlasting partnership with HCPs by providing them with right solutions. Signutra, Signature Nutrition.
When it comes time to start insulin therapy in my adult patients with type 2 diabetes, I prefer a physiologic approach. I prefer starting a once daily basal insulin like Lantus as opposed to premix insulin. And it's not just my recommendation, but it is the recommendation of global organizations. The ADA, EASD, the Canadian Association of Diabetes, American College of Physicians, IDF, all global organizations are in agreement that when it comes time to make that initial start of insulin, choose basal insulin first. It is physiologic in its approach. Once daily basal insulin, for instance with Lantus, fix fasting first, lower glucose toxicity, minimize glycemic variability, lower the set point of your PPGs. And in contrast to premix insulin, you are not condemning your patient to eat to feed that insulin. With premix, a patient is locked in to a specific delivery of a specific ratio of a longer acting and a shorter acting insulin. The patient is condemning themselves to eat to feed that insulin to minimize the risk of hypoglycemia. And if the patient is ill with reduced PO intake, what are they going to do? Take that premix and become hypoglycemic, or skip it and become hyperglycemic? Make the physiologic approach. Do once daily basal insulin with the innovator insulin glargine.
Good morning. Are the speakers joined remotely?
Yes.
Have the speakers been connected?
Good morning, Dr. Prasad. Both Dr. Ali
Good
and I
morning,
are
Dr.
here.
Alijava.
Good
Yeah.
morning.
I see that Dr. Manju Chandran has also joined.
Yes,
Dr. Alijava, are you connected with us?
Yes, I am.
I just thought I'd stay for a few minutes before I leave, and I'll come back for my
Good
session.
morning.
Yeah.
Welcome to SLENDO 2021. Sorry, 2020.
Thank you for the advance invitation. But thank you for the invitation for next year. We'll be there.
Looking forward.
India. Let me introduce Dr. Ali Java. He is consultant endocrinologist, adjunct professor, University of Health Sciences, Lahore, Pakistan. Over to you, Ali.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. It has always been a pleasure to be at SLENDO, whether virtual or in real. Sri Lanka has been one of my favorite destinations, and it's always a pleasure. Thank you, all of you, for inviting me for this talk. And I really, when I went through this talk, I really enjoyed it because it is a dilemma we face as a clinician every day. What kind of drug and what kind of agent do we need to start next? And that is a question that always comes to our mind. I'll try to kind of go back a little bit in time. And while I was reviewing it, I came across this interesting one. Let me try to change the slide. All right. In this article by Cefalu et al. In the American Diabetes Association that was published in 2012. By the way, that was a time when the thought process started to switch towards patient-centric approach and not a one-size-fits-all thought. They said that almost everyone has heard the saying, if you want to keep a friend, never talk about religion or politics. However, in regards to specific management of type 2 diabetes, we can alter this phrase somewhat and suggest if you want to keep a colleague, a friend, never talk about diabetes guidelines. But I will try to be very careful not to step on any toes, but I will present the evidence and the things that are out there. And I will start with this ADA ESD. This is the first time that the position statement, which had an angle to position patient-centric approach. And as you can look, you all are very familiar with this. In 2012, this was published. And in their concern they wanted to address was that how do you choose should be based on what is the ultimate patient's goal. Do you want to reduce side effects, cost, efficacy? Like if somebody's A1C is too high, do you really want to dabble with a drug that may not bring it down to the A1C? So that was the concern. At that time, the cardiovascular and other things were there, but not as prominently mentioned. And again, there was like the factors that were used to realize that were the patient attitude and expectations. The patient may not want a very aggressive approach, they may not be taking it seriously, the risk, disease duration, and life expectancy. Then that in response to that, the South Asian Federation of Endocrine Societies, they did come together and deliberated upon it, and a consensus recommendation on sulfonylureas and sulfonamide treatment was considered. As you can see in the previous ones, sulfonylurea are there, but they were getting quickly out of favor, and especially in the Western world. And we felt that this is something, these are good drugs that can help and control the diabetes as well as make it easier for the lives of the patient. So this consensus statement came out in 2018. Excuse me. And the purpose of that statement was that sulfonylureas are an important component of pharmacological armamentarium of the treatment of type 2 diabetes. They have well-established record. They have been there for a long time. They have gone through so many changes, and there is a huge data that is available, and we have first generation, second, third generation with decreasing side effect profile, better efficacy, and the cardiovascular data is out there as well. And the important thing is that it is cheaper than the other treatments that are out there that were being proposed and being pushed by various organizations. And that led to the disposition statement that this should be considered to be an important part, and its effect alongside with metformin should also be considered. And but if you look at in 2018, that the European Association of Study of Diabetes and the ADA, they joined hands and they published the data. And in this, if you look at that, after metformin, after lifestyle modification and metformin, the next steps include a DP4 inhibitor, GLP-1 receptor agonist, SGLT2 inhibitor, and TZD. You don't see sulfonylureas here. And if you look at the step even further, you don't see sulfonylurea there either. It is considered to be a much later in the details and in the because they felt that it is not safe and it is not that helpful. And this is a concern that they had, but they did not consider the fact that these are new drugs and we don't want to discard a proven drug. Anyway, this was a paradigm shift as Sheen et al. In 2019 they discussed that the reason why this push was there because there was new cardiovascular outcome data that has been continuously being published since 2015. It demonstrated a better cardiovascular and renal protection with two classes of medication, the SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonists. In GLP-1 receptor agonists, it was primarily the liraglutide that had a strong data. Thus, after lifestyle and metformin, there was a evidence-based push to promote and utilize and advocate GLP-1 receptor agonist and SGLT2, and sulfonylurea was moved a little bit further down the paradigm for treatment. And this was obviously an important change, but it did not consider our needs in our part of the world, like South Asia. We are have a big population, and the per capita income is not as good, as high as the Western countries. And we felt that there is a need to keep the sulfonylureas as a part of the algorithm for the treating doctors in part of the world. And this, obviously, we are very cognizant of the fact that the cardiovascular and renal protection and a patient-centric approach is essential. There's no one single approach to treat diabetes, and the evidence that is there from the GLP-1 receptor agonist and the SGLT2 inhibitors is there, and it's valid, and it makes a lot of sense. However, sulfonylureas still are one of the most widely prescribed medications for treatment of diabetes in our part of the world. Just because of the fact they have been there for too long and there are a lot of generics available, it is much more cheaper. And they do have a favorable cardiovascular profile as published in various studies. There have been studies that out there in which they have been shown to be as effective as other drugs and safe in people who fast in Ramadan, which is important because during Ramadan fasting, patients undergo a lot of body stress. There is a lot of dehydration, there's a lot of 16-hour fast, then the medication needs to be adjusted, and they have been proven to be effective. So all these factors were there. Anyway, the ACE and the American College of Endocrinology also came up with the management algorithm in 2020 that was published earlier this year. And if you look at the various things, lifestyle modification is always there, and the glycemic targets. After that, there is a therapy choice. And they have highlighted the importance of using therapy based on the underlying cardiovascular problems, heart failure, and renal status. And the comorbidities other than that that are there, mechanical and biomechanical. And if you look at it, that is a pretty elaborate breakup in which they have discussed that the cardiometabolic disease and biomechanical complication both need to be considered because these complications are there. If they have uncomplicated, there's a different role. If there are complications that are cardiovascular or biomechanical, they have a different algorithm. And therapeutic targets are modified accordingly. Medical therapy is individualized based on what are the options that are available. Interestingly, web and remote program monitoring of lifestyle therapy has been added because with the era of the COVID and the fact that the accessibility of the patients is not as it should have been because it is the travel as well exposure to COVID has definitely affected the thought process and how to revisit. And this is becoming more popular as is the online consultation support. And in the elaborate thing, obviously, this has always been there. The cardiovascular disease risk modification, blood pressure modification is considered to be add-on to the diabetes management of patients. So whenever the risk factors are there, high risk cutoffs, very high risk cutoff and extreme has been defined. And these are important because bringing them down also benefits the overall health of the patient. Similarly, AS and ARB, if there is a blood pressure goals are exceeded, to be added to make sure that there is not the complications can be mitigated. And this guidelines have been strengthened, and you look at it that the goals for the LDL cholesterol are much higher, and these emphasis for dual therapy has also been augmented in these guidelines. Similarly, in this, they had GLP-1 receptor agonist, according to the ACE and American College of Endocrinology guidelines. They are after lifestyle modification and metformin. In the dual therapy, they promote and recommend GLP-1 receptor agonist, SGLT2 inhibitors, polycevalin, which is not available in our part of the world, bromocriptine, as well as alpha-glucosidase inhibitors. There is a caution sign with TZDs, sulfonylureas and glenides, and basal insulin. And owing to the fact that they can potentially cause cardiovascular heart failure prone for TZDs, hypoglycemia for sulfonylurea, glenides, and basal insulin, they have made a caution at both at the dual therapy level as well as the triple therapy level, which kind of discourages doctors to use them as an important tool. And this is what they are advocating at this time. However, this is not what our part of the world needs a real life, a real world solution. Our patients cannot afford GLP-1 receptor agonist use in all our patients. only those who have sufficient socioeconomic status flexibility to be able to afford it can do that. And these, they initially starting, the recommendations are there, but now there's a caution that is there, which is understandable. However, the fact that we are ignoring an important insulin, pre-insulin use of sulfonylurea is a concern for our part of the world. So what about South Asia? Population is a huge population with diabetes, and many of them are younger age. Many of them have not enough economic power and prowess to be able to afford. So this is the model that was proposed by RSSDI and Endocrine Society of India, in which they made a practical case for they're keeping the sulfonylureas as a part of the second line therapy. Again, like all the organizations worldwide, the lifestyle modification and metformin are the centerpiece. And then afterwards, they had separated into various classes. They had a very innovative way of explaining is A to H. A is advancing age, B is BMI, C for CKD, D for duration of diabetes, E those who have established cardiovascular disease, F is those who are not able to afford the medications, at expensive ones. Glycemic status, how bad their glycemic status is at the time of treatment, and risk of hypoglycemia. And they have identified the various options that are available. And if you look at it, sulfonylureas are present in all of these categories. And obviously, this does not substitute clinical judgment, but this is an important thing because this is a practical guideline we need to give to our practicing doctors. As if they don't, then it will be a disservice to our patients. And the take-home message for my talk is that metformin is the first-line drug for treatment of type 2 diabetes. Next step therapy depends upon several factors like age, the body mass index, if they're overweight, the choices change. Chronic kidney disease presence does change the options that are available. How long the person has diabetes, that's important because the choices may change. You may have to go to triple therapy right away. Established cardiovascular disease, certain drugs will need to be avoided. Finances are important, they're a consideration because if it's not there, we cannot effectively treat the patient. If the control is getting worse, we may need to move to the next step and add on another step and concern about hyperglycemia and the possible effects of having a fall or a cardiovascular damage or a neurological damage. Sulfonylureas are safe, effective, and cost-effective and can be populated as second-line therapy as and when indicated. Thank you very much. I know we can't travel as much as we would like to, but looking forward to hosting you in the next physical as well as virtual Pakistan Endocrine Society conference. And this is a view from our most beautiful mountain ranges in the Gilgit-Baltistan. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Java, for finishing quite in time for a lot of questions. And the first question, I don't know whether you can see that, is that what is your experience on diabetes management?
Can you repeat that? Your voice broke in between. What is experience for novel injectable therapies on? Yeah. My personal experience has been very good. The fact is that we have two options that are available. One is the once a week formulation of GLP-1, and it is very effective and it works nicely. Compliance is much better, and the side effects are not as prominent for some reason. The other option that we have is daily liraglutide along with long-acting insulin in the form of an injection. That has also been very well received and it is very well tolerated. So the experience is very good. Again, if you choose your patients, they can afford it. Absolutely, GLP-1 receptor agonists have a very good role, especially as far as the weight is concerned, diabetes control is concerned, and overall compliance is concerned.
Thank you, Dr. Java. Audience, are there any questions? If you do, please walk onto the microphones and ask your questions. While the audience prepares, Dr. Java, I have a question for you. Now, you were mentioning about the issues related to Ramadan fasting. Do you change the therapy, particularly SGLT2s, during the Ramadan fasting?
Yes, what we do is if we are prescribing in the morning, we give in the evening because it does cause diuresis. And also it is an opportunistic approach as well because we know that by habit, those who fast tend to eat a little bit more than what they eat in the morning at Sahar. So if you give it when there is a potential for high carbohydrate intake, plus drinking plenty of fluids, so you mitigate the effects of the possibility of dehydration by giving it with iftar or at sundown. And that works very nicely. We conducted several studies here as well. The results have not been published yet, but the result has been that it is safe to give it at iftar.
Thank you. Just while the others prepare for their questions, now you elegantly showed the ADA algorithm based on various factors, and particularly in the South Asian context. When and how would you deviate from that algorithm? What are the practical tips for our South Asian doctors?
What I believe is if a person can afford, I would go with the ADA EAST model. If they cannot afford or they are reluctant to take an injection because there is a myth that injection is almost always insulin. If I cannot convince the patient and they are not willing to take it or they don't want to maintain the cold chain, then I would go with the RSH, TI and ESI model because that is more cost effective and realistic. We struggle with the fact that even those who are uh, true candidate for insulin, they may not take insulin just because they don't have place to store the insulin. And that is a dilemma. So you'll have to customize it. But if someone can afford, the ADA EST model does seem to be the logical approach.
So mainly it is based on the affordability, the last part of the ADA, the recommendation.
That's sad but true.
Any questions from the audience? So please open the microphone. Yeah.
And now you have classified how to introduce oral drugs depending on HbA1c.
Yes.
Right? If you, like what the AAC describes, according to the HbA1c, when you start with one drug, when you start with 2 oral drugs, and when you start with 3 oral drugs. Would it not be practical in our circumstance where patients do not come with HbA1c? They come just with the fasting blood sugar. Would that not be a reasonable time to factor to be considered? How many drugs to start with? That is, for example, you say metformin plus sulfonylurea and maybe a glitazone or a DPP4 inhibitor. Do you have any levels which you can decide how many drugs to start off straight off with?
A1C, you are absolutely right. I'm sorry. Did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
Yeah, but what I'm asking you, in the South Asian context, yeah, patients come without an HbA1c on the initial consultation. How do you...
Yeah. Hemoglobin A1C has several caveats in our part of the world. First of all, anemia is very prevalent. Thalassemia trait is very prevalent in South Asia. And number 3, A1C is an expensive test. I agree with that. That is, most of the time, most people don't get an A1C done regularly or follow up regularly. Even if they follow up, we may need to make changes based on the glucose monitoring data. One very theoretical way would be to estimate their average glucose and then extrapolate to the possible A1C. But in general, if the A1C, if the glucose reading fasting and random are not in the range and they are exceedingly high, then we add therapy. In my practice, I most of the time end up starting with dual therapy. Single therapy rarely works. Somebody who starts very early, their readings are barely above the recommended range. They seem to be driven and their diet is really out of whack. And if we recommend them, then I can start with single therapy. But most of the time, we end up starting with dual therapy. A1C is not a practical solution. I agree with that. It is expensive. The other problem is that reputable labs are important as well. The access to a reputable lab may not be available everywhere. And the A1C, if it is not done properly, you can have erroneous results. So absolutely, A1C is not a prerequisite. It is good to have from reputable lab, but most of the time the titration and adjustment is based on blood glucose monitor.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Java. And there's another question. If you can see that, what's the place of SGLT2 inhibitors in CKD beyond stage 3B?
The SGLT2 inhibitors, there are various types. Some of them are much more favorable renal profile. And in that context, the empagliflozin does seem to have a better profile as compared to dapagliflozin. And this does, however, after a certain stage, the SGLT2 inhibitors may not be as beneficial or helpful. They have a side effect or benefit of getting rid of extra fluid, which helps the heart failure patients as well as the fluid overload patients. But beyond that, it's somewhat, in my opinion, a risky proposition. And I would be very careful in prescribing it.
And the last one, what is the prevalence of UTI in patients taking SGLT2 inhibitors?
SGLT2, yeah, SGLT2 inhibitors, if I'm not wrong, the percentage of UTI varies from region to region. It has a lot of connotation based on the personal hygiene practices, as well as previous history of UTI and predispositions anatomical. I have come across 3 to 5% in patients, and some doctors have a practice of checking urinalysis before and after, and but the prevalence varies from region to region.
Yeah, I think it's in my personal experience, this is not really UTI, but balanitis, Muslim males tolerate SGLT2 inhibitors very well in here. Have you got any similar experience there?
Yeah, the UTI we notice is almost always in women. In men, I've not come across UTI at all. And that is why it kind of makes you think that if there is the difference of the anatomy that explains it, not the drug itself.
So, Dr. Java, thank you very much, and all the blessings from Sri Lanka for you and from the Endocrine College of Endocrinologists. We thank you very much for joining with us despite all the odds of the COVID epidemic. And we look forward to have more deliberations with Pakistan and you in future. Thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Let me invite the audience to join me in thanking Dr. Java in the usual way. So the next speaker is Dr. Sanjay Kalra. He is the present president of the Endocrine Society of India, consultant endocrinologist and head Bharati Research Institute of team. Is Dr. Kalra connected?
Hi, Prasad.
Greetings, Sanjay.
Hi.
Again, I already introduced you to the audience, so you can straight away go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here in Sri Lanka, in Kandy with everyone. Sri Lanka has very special place in my heart and in the hearts of every South Asian endocrinologist. And the reason is that Sri Lanka, and especially Colombo, in the very safe and very efficient and very effective hands of our chairperson, Dr. Prasad Katulanda, is the birthplace of SAFES, the South Asian Federation of Endocrine Societies. Today, we'll talk about novel therapy in diabetes, and we'll see what South Asia is going to get in the next couple of years in terms of newer medication, in terms of newer treatment strategies. Diabetes is a very dynamic field. Most of us would know that it's just 99 years since insulin was first injected into a human being. But some of us may not know that it is actually 100 years. On the 30th of July in 1920, insulin was injected for the first time into an animal, into a dog. And 30th of July, which has just gone by, is celebrated as Insulin Appreciation Day. Even less of us would know that we are celebrating this year the 95th anniversary of the first biostandardization of insulin. So it was in 1925 in August that in Edinburgh, researchers from across the world met and they agreed upon a dosage of 1 unit of insulin being equal to 0.125 milligrams of insulin. So 1 unit was equal to 0.125. This has changed a lot. The insulins that we used 100 or 99 years ago, the biostandardization that was done 95 years ago, these do not exist anymore. We have newer drugs to use. But this innovation is continuing. It's still evolving. And now we are continuing to discover newer drug targets. We continue to develop newer drugs, preparations, and delivery devices. At the same time, we are developing better safety measures and monitoring tools. There are so many targets to choose from that it becomes difficult. We are all aware of the ominous octet coined by DeFronzo. Now, the targets for glucose control or for glucose modulation have gone beyond these 8. We not only target glucose metabolism to manage diabetes, we also target lipid metabolism now. Another change that has occurred is earlier, we used to focus only on glucometabolic control. So when a patient would come to us in the OPD, he or she would say, "Doctor, I need to feel healthy." That is symptomatic control. And then he or she would say, "I need good glucose monitor, good glucose control, a good fasting, a good postprandial." All these are developments of just the past 3 decades or so. But in the past 1 decade, we have now moved from simple glucometabolic control to vasculometabolic control or vasculometabolic benefit. So now our patients demand and we are able to offer vasculometabolic benefit. So if a patient comes to you and says, "Doctor, you are giving me this Western medication, but I would rather take an alternative therapy because I've heard that Western medication is very hot. It causes a lot of side effects. It can damage my kidneys. It can damage my heart." Then the answer is, "No, madam. We have drugs which give you good glucose control and also vascular benefit." We have moved one step beyond that as well now, and now we speak of viscerometabolic benefit as well. So the newer drugs that are coming up, provide benefit to the liver, to the ovaries, to the adipose tissue, and this is viscerometabolic benefit. All these newer approaches put together actually make life very complicated for the practicing physician. But let's try to make it simple. What are some of the drugs that may come up? This we can understand if we understand the drug targets. So one drug target is 11 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. Hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1, as the name suggests, is an enzyme which breaks down the hormone cortisone into cortisol. Cortisol is an active hormone. It is a counter-regulatory hormone. It counteracts insulin. So if you have too much of cortisol, then you will have more of insulin resistance. 11 beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase is upregulated in adipose tissue. So in obese men and women, this hormone is more active. Therefore, there is more cortisol. If we can inhibit this hormone, we may be able to improve insulin sensitivity and manage diabetes. So this is one potential therapy. Another therapy relates to the glucose metabolism pathway, and this is glucokinase. Now, what happens when we consume food? When we consume food, the nutrients are absorbed, glucose level goes up. The glucose stimulates glucokinase, and glucokinase, which is present in the liver and the pancreas, then stimulates the release of insulin and also stimulates gluconeogenesis in the liver. If we can activate glucokinase will be able to motivate the beta cells to secrete more insulin. Also make sure that the liver has better lipid metabolism and glycogen metabolism. And this also may help in managing diabetes. There are other downstream effects or targets also in the glucose metabolism chain. And one of them is G protein coupled receptor 119. By stimulating this, if you get a GPR 119 agonist, if you can stimulate this, you will be able to stimulate the release of incretins like GLP-1 and GIP. So GLP-1 and GIP, both are incretins, both have different mechanisms of action. GIP is considered a poor cousin, but it does have its own actions. And using a GPC receptor 119 agonist, you may be able to stimulate their endogenous production. Another inhibitor that we can try in diabetes management is glycogen phosphorylase inhibitor. What does glycogen phosphorylase do? The word ase means that it breaks down glycogen. So glycogen is broken down into glucose 1-phosphate, which is broken down into glucose. If we can inhibit this enzyme, then glycogen will not be broken down, and the glycogen will remain as such. Glucose levels will not enter the body. If glucose doesn't increase, then you can manage diabetes. So glycogen phosphorylase inhibitors are another potential therapy for diabetes. Some of us may say, why should we learn about all these? They are not available in the market yet. Why should I be prepared for these? The reason comes from this quote by Louis Pasteur. Chance supports the prepared mind. Sorry for the typo here. Chance favors the prepared mind. How can we prepare? In South Asia, we have been working upon recommendations for use of latest drugs. And in Colombo, 2 years ago, we all met together to create a consensus recommendation on GLP-1RA use. I would like to mention here that the South Asian Task Force strongly recommended use of GLP-1RA in persons with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease and those at high risk of ASCVD. And our document it antedates the European and American document by at least 6 months. Going on with GLP-1RA, like you've seen, we've just mentioned newer drugs also. The agonists, they are also focusing on increasing the endogenous use of endogenous production or availability of GLP-1 and GIP. But the existing drugs that we have, like dulaglutide, are being used in higher doses. Dulaglutide, which is available in South Asia as 0.75 and 1.5 milligram, is now being studied as 3 and 4.5 milligram dosage once a week. And it is thought that this will improve HbA1c, and also help in better weight loss. Other developments are also taking place in the GLP-1 RA scenario, and one of them is once weekly semaglutide, which has been approved in India just a week ago. Once weekly semaglutide injectable is a drug which has been found to be good at reducing glucose, at reducing body weight, and at improving CV outcomes. Another evolution in semaglutide is the development of oral semaglutide, which has passed all phase 3 trials now and is approved in many markets, including Europe and USA. Oral semaglutide is given once daily. There is something called the SNAC technology, SNAC, which allows semaglutide, which is a polypeptide, to be administered orally while maintaining its bioavailability. Oral semaglutide, again, South Asia is at the forefront of studying this, and we hope to have it soon in our markets. If you remember, we spoke about the fact that GIP is not a poor cousin of GLP-1. It has its own uh, advantage or its own functions in the body. So this drug called tirzepatide is a dual agonist. It is an agonist of GIP receptors and GLP-1 receptors. And when it acts upon both of these, tirzepatide is able to achieve HbA1c targets in up to 90% of patients. And it's also able to reduce body weight by a whopping 11 kg in 26 weeks. And if there is one person in South Asia who is looking forward to these drugs to help reduce body weight, that's me. I would really like these drugs to come in and to be available for use in a non-diabetic population. My own HbA1c is 4.4, but I really wish these drugs were available so that I could help lose they could help me lose my weight. We've spoken so far about newer drugs. We've spoken about the GLP-1 family. We've talked of oral semaglutide and once weekly semaglutide. These are the drugs that will be available soon in South Asia. But let's not forget insulin. In the beginning, we spoke about the history of insulin, how we are sharing, how we are celebrating the century of insulin appreciation and 95 years of insulin biostandardization. We all know the various Nobel Prizes that insulin has won, at least 4 of them. But there was a 5th as well. And this was in 1934 when George Minot won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for treatment of pernicious anemia. How did insulin help win this Nobel Prize? The reason is that George himself had type 1 diabetes and he was on deathbed in 1920. It's only when he got insulin that he survived. And then he survived, his neurons also survived, and he was able to do research which helped us diagnose and manage pernicious anemia, which at that time also was a fatal disease. So that's the advantage of insulin. Let's move on to newer advances in insulin therapy. In prandial insulin, we are all used to the fast-acting insulins, aspart, lispro, and glulicine, but now very fast-acting or ultra-rapid-acting insulin is available in South Asia. That is called FIASP, fast-acting insulin aspart, which is more physiological, and the pharmacokinetics of which match our glucose profile after a meal. While on one hand, we have ultra-rapid acting insulins, we are also developing ultra-long acting insulins. We do have once daily insulins like Glargine U300 and like Degludec, but Icodec is an insulin which has very high albumin binding. A few changes have been made to the insulin molecule, and Icodec, because of these amino acid substitutions, is able to be used once weekly. The injection is the same like once daily insulin. When you inject it, it binds to the albumin in the subcutaneous tissue and becomes inactive. Very little of it reaches the insulin receptors, but after 2 or 3 injections, a steady state is built up. And after 3 injections, you have a very basal, very slow acting, but a very consistent glucose lowering with Icodec. This once weekly insulin will add to the benefits of once weekly GLP-1 RA that we already have with semaglutide and dulaglutide. I just said that insulin will add to the benefits of GLP-1. How does that occur? This is from the Sri Lankan proverb. 1 + 1 is not equal to 2. 1 plus 1 is equal to 11. And that is how you can combine insulin with GLP-1RA. So in South Asia now, we have fixed ratio combinations as opposed to fixed dose. Fixed ratio combination means that in one pen, in one delivery device, you can get a GLP-1RA like liraglutide and a basal insulin like degludec. Both of them work together and they can be used once daily to provide fasting and postprandial control. For IDEG Lira, this is the name of the drug, we do not count in terms of units. We count in terms of dose steps. So one dose step of IDEG Lira is 1 unit of degludec and 0.036 milligram of liraglutide. You start with 10 or 16 dose steps depending upon the patient profile, and you can go up till a maximum of 50 dose steps. We also have, though it is not available in South Asia as of today, but it will soon be available, we have a combination of insulin glargine and lixisenatide. So glargine is basal insulin, lixisenatide is a once daily GLP-1RA, and you can use these. There are two different delivery devices. You can start with either 10 or 20 or 30 units of insulin glargine lixi. We have studied the effects of insulin glargine lixi versus insulin degludec lira in adults that have not been well controlled on GLP-1RA. And this paper of ours was presented at ADA 2020. And it was also published recently, just last month, in Diabetes, Obesity and Metabolism. What we found out is that in terms of HbA1c control and in terms of fasting plasma glucose control, IDEG Lira is more effective than IGLAR Lixi. But overall, when you look at body weight release or HbA1c targets, then practically both are the same. But what this does tell us is that if you use insulin and GLP-1RA together, you will be able to achieve good control. Do remember that everything is not good about insulin. And this is in front of you is the second most poisonous animal on earth. But this is not found on earth. It is actually found at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, a bit to the south west of Sri Lanka. And this is called Conus geographus. Conus geographus is an animal that dwells at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, and it kills fish. The venom of this fish, animal contains insulin, so it kills fish by hypoglycemia. We should be aware that hypoglycemia can occur in persons with diabetes, and therefore nasal glucagon has also been developed. This hopefully should be available in South Asia in the next couple of years. We do have injectable glucagon, but if we get nasal glucagon, it will become much easier for our patients to use. I am mindful that in a hybrid conference like SLENDO, we have to always be in time. And if all the speakers remain in time, in range all the time, then SLENDO will be a very beautiful experience. However, sometimes we go out of range, and the same happens in diabetes. Sometimes we may have hyperglycemia, we may have hypoglycemia. If we cannot monitor properly, we will not be able to treat properly. So how are we checking glycemic range? How are we checking time in range? This is now done by techniques such as ambulatory glucose monitoring and CGMS. The term that we use is glycemic compass. The glycemic compass through AGM and through CGMS helps us continue our journey with diabetes in a very safe and very fulfilling manner. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share some of the latest advances with you and to give a peek into what we can expect for our patients and for ourselves over the next couple of years. Thank you, and it's been a very pleasant experience being part of SLENDO.
Thank you, Sanjay, being on time and being in the range. So I think we have enough time to ask you questions. Let me invite the audience to join me in asking questions from. Can you see the question, Sanjay? What are the characteristics of patients who are increased risk for euglycemic decay with SGLT2 inhibitor?
This is very important, and thank you for raising this. So there is a lot of discussion now about using SGLT2 inhibitors, not only for glucose control, but also for cardiac health and renal health. Studies have also shown that these drugs can be used in non-diabetic individuals. We must be aware of the caveats, however. So some of the teaching tools or the learning tools that I follow in my OPD. Number one, let me talk about something called metabolic triage. Do a triage and classify all your patients into three groups. One is anabolic. The second one is eubolic, eubolic. The third is catabolic. Maladaptive anabolic means somebody who is overweight, obese, who has all the stigmata of metabolic syndrome. Eubolic means somebody who does have diabetes. So that is not eubolism. He does have dysglycemia, but otherwise the rest of the metabolism is fine. The body weight is normal. The lipids are normal. There is no evidence of severe insulin resistance. In these two groups of patients, SGLT2 inhibitors will be very safe to use. The third group is catabolic, severely catabolic. These are the patients who are thin, malnourished. They have evidence of macronutrient deficiency, micronutrient deficiency, evidence of insulin deficiency. They have stigmata of autoimmune diseases. In this group of patients, we have to be very careful because they are at high risk of ketoacidosis. So do not prescribe SGLT2 inhibitors until you are sure that insulin levels are adequate. In the first two groups, eubolic and anabolic, the endogenous insulin was adequate. So we could give SGLT2 inhibitors and they should be used in anabolic patients. In this third group, we have to make sure that exogenous insulin is adequate. Only then can we start SGLT2. This is one learning tool that I follow. Another learning tool that I follow is it tells me about the pathophysiology of ketoacidosis. So why will ketosis occur? Ketosis may occur because of deficiency of carbohydrate, deficiency of fluids, deficiency of insulin. If there is any patient who is at risk of these three, maybe deficiency of carbohydrate, the patient has suddenly decided to go on a keto diet. Deficiency of fluid, the patient is fasting during Ramadan, he or she says, I will not drink water for 14 hours. Or deficiency of insulin, the patient is insulin deficient or insulinopenic, or the patient was on insulin and suddenly he or she stops his treatment. All these are risk factors for euglycemic decay. So these three deficiencies, avoid SGLT2 inhibitor use. The third teaching tool or the third learning tool for me is the dangerous Ds. So where will I avoid SGLT2 inhibitor use? D for debility, debilitated patients. D for duration of life, the very young, the very old. D for deranged renal function. D for digit ischemia, for canagliflozin in particular. D for drugs which may be renotoxic, like NSAIDs, another D, and D for diuretics, especially high dose loop diuretics. So these three learning tools, I hope will be able should be able to help you understand whom not to use these drugs in your clinic. I hope that was fine, Dr. Prasad. Otherwise, I can take the question again directly.
Well, I think that's exactly spot on, Sanjay, and also thank you for giving these very practical tips for us. And the other question is, how effective is oral semaglutide compared to parenteral in terms of weight control?
It is supposed to be better actually. We have trials going on in India, and the weight loss is phenomenal. So I do not know the exact figures from the Indian data centers because it's not published yet. But otherwise, you can get up to 10% weight loss with this drug. The other beauty is that it is being tried in people without diabetes as well. So this is something that we really look forward to in the obesity management arena.
I think, if I can remember, I think there was some data presented in AD this time and also showed some higher weight loss with oral semaglutide.
Yeah.
If I can remember.
In injectable semaglutide, just be aware that there is a safety signal for proliferative retinopathy. But that doesn't mean you cannot use it in such patients. You just have to be careful and do not be very aggressive in glucose lowering in proliferative retinopathy. Bring the glucose down slowly.
There's another question, Sanjay. Will SGLT2 inhibitors or insulin analogs, when taken over a long period, have a carcinogenic effect?
Very doubtful. So for all the insulin analogs that we have, you have to measure. So how does insulin act? It has a mitogenic effect and it has a metabolic effect. For most of the insulin analogs that are available, the the ratio of mitogenicity to metabolic effect is 1:1 or less than 1:1. So all these drugs are safe. For glargine, there is a slightly higher mitogenic effect as compared to metabolic effect. But this is shown in vitro studies, not in vivo studies. And there was initially a scare about the carcinogenicity of glargine about 4 years ago, but that has been laid to rest. So we can use these drugs safely lifelong. Cardiovascular safety is also very strongly demonstrated with glargine as well as with degludec. Regarding the SGLT2 inhibitors, there initially were safety concerns about carcinoma bladder with dapagliflozin, but these have also been laid to rest. And the amount of data that we have collected on SGLT2 inhibitors in terms of cardiovascular outcomes, viscerometabolic outcomes, this is very reassuring. So we do not need to worry about carcinogenicity with these drugs. There is again a safety signal regarding pioglitazone and carcinoma bladder, but that is related to cumulative use of pioglitazone. So if you use it in low doses, like 15 milligram, again, the drug is safe to use for a long period of time.
Thank you, Sanjay. Any other questions from the audience?
I have a question from Dr. Pankaj Patwari, SGLT2 inhibitors in elderly with osteoporosis. So do not go by the chronological age. SGLT2 inhibitors have been studied in people up till 75 years of age. So above 75, go slow. But do not go by the chronological age, go by the frailty index. If you have a frail elderly, then these drugs should not be used. If you have a healthy elderly person, then go ahead and use. Regarding the osteoporosis part specifically, SGLT2 inhibitors will not do any harm to bone health. There were theoretical concerns about its effect on FGF23, but practically it will not do any harm, so we can use. Dr. Prasad, do we have time? Because Dr. Saima Ghosh has asked to repeat the 3 learning tools.
Sorry?
I have a question from Dr. Saima Ghosh. She is requesting me to repeat the 3 learning tools.
Yes, please go ahead.
We have time. So the first one, Dr. Saima, is metabolic triage, TRIAGE. We divide all patients into 3. Maladaptive anabolic, that is my phenotype. Eubolic, EUBOLIC, that is Dr. Prasad Katulanda's phenotype. And severe catabolic, that means thin, lean, malnourished, BMI of 18. Somebody might have come in with pancreatic diabetes or with type 1 diabetes. You may not be able to differentiate also. I would like to mention here that all adult diabetes is not type 2 diabetes. So when you have somebody coming in who is very lean, it is possible that that person may have type 2 diabetes, but please take time out to rule out autoimmune and pancreatic diabetes. That is the first learning tool. In maladaptive anabolic, we will preferentially use SGLT2 inhibitors, GLP-1RA, and high dose of metformin. In catabolic, we will prefer insulin. The second learning tool is the 3 deficiencies which can precipitate ketoacidosis in a person with or without diabetes. Deficiency of carbohydrate, deficiency of fluid or water in the body, deficiency of insulin. So make sure that all these 3 do not coexist with SGLT2 inhibitor usage. The third learning tool is the dangerous Ds. D for debility, that is frailty, the same question which Dr. Pankaj asked. D for duration of life. Avoid SGLT2 inhibitor use in children, adolescents, preconception, pregnancy, and the very elderly. Above 75 would be a cutoff if we were forced to give based upon data. D is for deranged renal function. D for digit ischemia. And D for drugs, especially diuretics, especially high dose loop diuretics. And the other D would be, again in drugs, NSAIDs, the painkillers.
Yeah, I think we may be able to just answer the last question, Sanjay. Can you see that? Should we change to SGLT2 inhibitors with good glycemic control when that patient had MI?
We should add. So now the recommendation is that you can give it for good glucose control. So that's fine. But even if you do not require better glucose control, for vasculometabolic benefit and viscerometabolic benefit, we should add an SGLT2 inhibitor like empagliflozin or dapagliflozin over and above standard of care. It will not cause increased hypoglycemia. If at all you are worried, you reduce the dose of insulin or sulfonylureas, and you should add it for the cardiac benefit that these drugs prescribe. So we would encourage this use. Be mindful of the contraindications and the dangerousness. I have another question, Doctor, from Dr. Patwari. Neuropathic foot ulcer, which is healing or healed. Yes, Dr. Pankaj, we can use SGLT2 inhibitors. So we don't need to worry. Avoid canagliflozin. The other two will be safer, DAPA and EMPA.
So Sanjay, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. We really enjoyed your talk, very informative. And let me invite the audience to show appreciation in the visual style.
Thank you. It was very pleasant. Thank you. And everybody stay safe.
Same with you.
Thanks.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now we are going to have a brief break before we have the next panel discussion on pituitary disease. Thank you.